Hello, everyone. This is Ariel Clay, the San Joaquin County 4-H program representative, bringing you the second video in our series about the paper record books and how to do them. So this video will be all about Section 2, which consists of a single form called the Personal Development Record or Report. So it's a single form, but it's multiple pages long. It's probably the longest form in the record book, except for maybe the leadership development report if you do a lot of leadership roles. So this will probably be the longest video. And people often get a little intimidated by the personal development report, but it's actually not too bad once you understand the logic behind it, and the end result is really great because it's essentially a summary of everything that you did in 4-H in a given year. And it's also the way that you achieve what we call star ranks. So if you see someone walking around in the 4-H uniform and you see on their 4-H hat that it has a bronze or a silver or a gold star on it, that is earned through doing your personal development report. That'll make a little more sense in a minute when we look farther into the report. But before we dive into all the nitty-gritty bits and pieces of the PDR, I just want to recommend that you have the record book manual handy during this video, because if you go down to page 10, it dives into a lot of detail about the PDR. So I will tell you most of this information in this video, but it's helpful to have this to refer back to, and it also gives a lot of helpful examples. So I won't be able to give you every single example that you could put in different parts of the PDR. So some of the examples in here might help. Or maybe I just didn't explain something very clearly in the video. So this is definitely your first stop if you have any questions after this video. So if you don't have it handy, I recommend pausing and printing one off real quick. Okay, so going back to the actual personal development report, I'm using the Word document, and I've created an example one. So anything that's black type was the form. So it's what you'll find when you download or print off the form yourself. Anything in blue is stuff that I entered. So I created a fake 4-H club and a pretend person for the sake of an example. As you can see, I'm typing directly on the Word document, which is great, especially if you don't have neat handwriting. If you want, you can do a handwritten record book form. Just you would need to make sure that one, it was legible, and two, we ask that you use blue or black ink because it looks a little more professional, and also it's much more legible and easier to read than, say, hot pink or pencil or something like that. All right, so it's basically simple demographic information for the first box. So your county, your club name, you're probably not going to be a fake 4-H club. That's obviously fake. Your program year, total years in 4-H, name, birth date, your 4-H age, so how old you were on December 31st, your grade in school. If you're homeschooled, you can use your estimated grade, or if you simply put homeschooled, that would probably serve the purpose. Address, this is our office address for the county 4-H office. And then this is actually my email and phone number for work. So if you ever have any questions or just want to say hi, you can reach me at either of those places by email or phone. So you can also add your picture. So you can see I've inserted one already here. If I shrink it down, you can see what it looks like before you put in a picture. So it's just a blank box with the type your picture optional. So if you click on the box to select it like that, and then you go to Insert and Pictures, it'll allow you to choose a picture and it will insert it in this box. And then you can size it however you like. And then when you print off your PDR, your picture will already be there. If you would rather print off the finished PDR and then just glue or tape a picture here, that's fine as well. As is not having a picture at all. It is totally optional. All right, moving on to the next box. Club meetings attended during the year. So the first box is how many meetings were held by your club, then the number that you attended, an estimate of about how many hours worth of meetings that was. So in my estimate, 4-H club meetings usually last about an hour, when I was in 4-H at least. So just 9 hours worth of meetings probably. And then you calculate the percent attended. So 9 divided by 10 in this case being 90%. And the reason that we ask you to calculate that is for those achievement ranks that I mentioned earlier. So to get those achievement ranks, you have to have had 80% attendance at your club meetings. So even though club meetings are technically optional, in order to get one of these achievement ranks, you have to have 80% attendance for the year that you're applying. So maybe this year, if my percent attended was 75%, I wouldn't be able to apply this year. But next year, assuming that I had it at 80% or above, I could apply next year. Also, I apologize that I'm a little congested. It's very smoky out today, so I'm a little sniffly. Okay, and then the final box on the first page is the signature box. So 3 people basically need to say, yes, this is correct and true, and the member did the work themselves, their parent or another adult didn't do it for them. So the first signature is your own, the member's signature. Then you have the parent or guardian sign. So parent and guardians, make sure that you didn't actually do the work for them. And then 4-H adult partner is almost always your community club leader. We just use the phrase adult partner because there are many different types of 4-H clubs and units and activities. So in some cases, it's not a community club leader who would sign it. It would be somebody in a slightly different role. But in San Joaquin County, at least, it's pretty much always going to be your community club leader who will sign this. So that's your first page. All right. So the second page is all about those star ranks that I was talking about. So we are actually going to skip over this second page for just a couple of minutes so that I can come back and you'll kind of understand a little bit more of what we mean by some of these things. So you can see what I mean. It can be a little intimidating when you first look at it, but believe me, all of this will make perfect sense when we come back in a few minutes. So the one thing I will point out is the rest of the PDR is divided into these 8 categories. So I'm going to go through a couple of these categories so that you can get an idea of what they are, and then we'll come back and I'll explain these numbers and why some things I highlighted and some things aren't and that kind of thing. Okay, so category 1 in the PDR are projects completed. So that is exactly what it sounds like. Any 4-H project that you finished, you would include in your PDR in section 1. So in my example, I was in the poultry project. I was a camp junior counselor, so I was in that leadership project to prepare for it, and I also did robotics. So those would be my 3 projects, and then later on in the record book, I should have an annual project report that corresponds to each one of these. But that's a whole different video. Look for the annual project report video for info on how to do that part of the record book. Now, next, this column asks you how many meetings were held for each project. So these were the number of meetings scheduled by the project leader. Then meetings that you actually attended. So you can see overall my attendance was pretty good. I only missed 1 meeting here. I made all the meetings on that one. I missed 2 for robotics, so that's a little sad. But overall, I attended 15 project meetings out of 18 project meetings for that year. Then we have you just estimate about how many hours you spent doing that project. It kind of gives us an idea of the scope of the project. A 6 hour project as opposed to a 40-hour project can be interesting to see. So in my example, I just made up some numbers, but try to estimate as close as you can. It doesn't have to be exact. And then once again, we'll ask you to calculate your percent attended. So I have 86, 171%. And then down here, I calculate my average percentage overall. So overall, my project meeting attendance was at 86%. And the reason we have you calculate that is once again related to the achievement rank. So, like your club meeting attendance, you need to have 80% average attendance across all of your projects. So, you can see my robotics project, I didn't have 80% attendance. So, sometimes people think, oh, I didn't have 80% in one of my projects, so that eliminates my ability to be able to apply for a rank this year. That's not quite true. As long as your average is 80% or above, you're fine. So you can have one or two projects that dip below 80% as long as your other projects make up for it. We give a little bit of wiggle room because we know sometimes things happen. The one other thing I want to say about projects that you include in your personal development record is that for the hours for each project, you have to have at least 6 hours. That's a minimum requirement for a project across 4-H nationwide, is that a project has to have at least 6 hours worth of instruction. So even if you attended all of the project meetings, if it didn't come to 6 hours, maybe your leader had to cancel a bunch of meetings or they got sick halfway through the year, if you ended up meeting for fewer than 6 hours, then that isn't considered an actual project. So you wouldn't be able to include that project on here. Same thing if, let's say, I missed a bunch of meetings for robotics and I only had 5 hours worth of attendance. Once again, even though, let's say in this example that each meeting was an hour long, and so there were 7 hours worth of meetings, but I only attended 5 hours worth of them. This would not be considered a completed project in that case. So, hopefully that all makes sense. And I'm going to show you one more category before we go back up to the star ranks to kind of explain that page. So the next bit are what we call project scale activities. So in this category, you record anything where you demonstrate a skill that you've learned. So this can even be a skill for a project that you're not currently in. So a good example of that would be I've included that I did food showmanship at Food Fiesta and counted that as a project skill, even though I'm not in a food project. That's still a skill that I've demonstrated, so I can include it as a project skill activity. So I have a lot of different example types, and once again, this is where having the record book manual handy is good because it gives a lot of other examples as well. So project skill activities can be anytime that you exhibit something in a competition. So for example, exhibiting a floral arrangement at the Lodi Grape Festival. I'm exhibiting my skills at arranging flowers. So that would be a project skill. Another example would be an exhibit where maybe you're not even judged. A non-judged exhibit can count as well. So a lot of 4-H clubs will do a National 4-H Week display at a library or a storefront or something in their town, showing all the cool things that their club is doing. So in that case, as long as you helped create that display and it includes something that you did, that would be a project skill even though it wasn't judged. Entering Food Fiesta would be a project skill. Participating in fashion review would definitely be a project skill. In San Joaquin County, we have this great event called Ag Field Day, which is basically just a bunch of different ag-related activities, and a lot of those can be counted as project skills. So any kind of judging contest, so in this case vegetable judging, can be a project skill. Knowledge bowls, so like a livestock knowledge bowl would count. And even though these two things were at the same event on the same day, they're materially different skills that I'm demonstrating. Vegetable judging is not the same kind of skill as livestock knowledge bowl. So I can count those as two different entries. However, I couldn't say I did tomato judging, onion judging, celery judging. All of those are pretty similar. So you would count all of those different types of judging together under vegetable judging. Um, so if you do something like this where you're counting multiple credits from the same event on the same day, just make sure that they're each a distinct skill from each other. And then similarly, this is probably the same dress that I exhibited at County Fashion Review and State Fashion Review. However, they're on different dates at different venues, so in front of a different audience. So that would count as two credits, two different entries, even though it's the same skill with the same exact dress. It was done at the demonstration was at different times. And then my final example is showmanship will always count as a project skill activity. So doing swine showmanship at AgFest, State Fair, anything like that, you can definitely count. The one thing to remember is you can't count every single time you go in the ring. So for example, in my swine example, I can't count the time that I went in for my market class as an entry, and then another entry of when I went in to do regular showmanship, and then again when I made it into the champion round. That wouldn't be three separate entries, that would be one single entry. However, maybe I did FFA sheep showmanship at AgFest. Showing sheep is a different skill than showing swine, so that's why I could separate those two from each other. Now you'll notice that we actually allow you to include a few project skill activities that you've done outside of 4-H. We want to recognize the work that you're doing even outside of our program. To a certain degree. You can list up to 2 of them. So you can't fill your record book with things that you've done outside of 4-H. We give you a little bit of room to do that, but not the entire thing. So examples of project skill activities outside of 4-H, that sheep showmanship example, showing a dog at a dog show, anything like that, where it's very similar to a 4-H project skill, but it's just done outside of 4-H. Okay, so those are examples of types of things that would be project skill activities. I'll briefly explain these other columns real quick. So we want to know the date that you did it, and ideally in your record book it should go in chronological order. And it's okay to have date ranges. So for example, Lodi Grape Festival is a few days long. Then we want you to estimate about how long you spent doing that activity. So for project skill activities, these are going to be probably a matter of minutes as opposed to hours. We ask that in the record book that you use decimals based on hours. So 0.5 would be half an hour. And if you need help calculating those decimals, if you go into the manual, we actually have a time conversion chart here on page 5. So if you want to get extremely exact and you spent 52 minutes in the ring showing your pig, you can be like, that was 0.87. You can get really exact if you want. As you can see in my example, I tended to round. So I'd be like, okay, that was about 20 minutes I spent vegetable judging, so that would be a third, or 0.33 of an hour. Try to be reasonably accurate, but you don't have to be super duper down to the minute. Then the level is using these codes right here, which they have a handy key right here above that lets you know what these different letters stand for. So you can be doing an activity at the individual level, at the club level, county, all the way up to global. And so you would just put the letter corresponding to the code next to the entry. And so this kind of gives us an idea of the scale and the scope of the activity. So you can see at a glance that I've done a number of county level activities, um, and even a state level activity, a little bit of local stuff. But it gives you an idea of the breadth and depth of my activities in 4-H. And then finally, the location. I choose to use kind of the name of the location, so Stockton Library, Cabral Ag Center, which is where our 4-H office is located. Um, I do know people who prefer to use addresses. That's fine as well. Basically, a reasonable person should be able to look at the location and be like, okay, yeah, I can figure out where that is based on a Google search. So once again, you can decide the level of detail that you want, what makes sense to you. But especially if you do record book competitions, you'll want to make sure that it's something that would also make sense to somebody other than you. All right, so those are categories 1 and 2. So projects completed and then project skill activities. We are going to go back up to page 2 for a minute now that we kind of have a little bit of context. So you can see that this big box that you end up filling out is basically a summary of these other boxes you do. So you can see up here in the gray area, it asks you, okay, how many projects had you completed in past years in 4-H? So for example, my fake profile here says that this is my 5th year in 4-H. During my first 4 years, I did 10 projects. And then the number that I completed this year, so 3, and then total all years. So you take this information right here and you just transpose it here. So you take that summary and put it here. So total past years, total this year, total all years. Now this is where calculating your star rank comes in. So to get your bronze star, you would be looking at this column here. To get your silver, you would be looking at this column, and so on. So this box right here explains a little bit about what the star ranks are. And it tells you to get your bronze star, you need to complete at least 5 of the 8 categories in the bronze column. So maybe I didn't do all the I didn't do attend 12 events, and I didn't do 10 community service, and I didn't get any honors and recognition. I would still have fulfilled 5 of the 8 categories, so I would be able to get my bronze star. However, do pay attention to the ones that have an asterisk. Those are required. You have to do those in order to get your star rank. So, for example, for your bronze star, you have to complete a certain number of projects. So for bronze, that's 2. When you get up to your silver rank, you need to complete up to at least 4 projects, gold at least 8, and then platinum at least 12. So you can see I like to highlight the ones that I've completed, just so that I can tell at a glance where I am in terms of these different ranks. So that's the project completed line. Then the second line is those project skill activities. So once again, the numbers I inputted up here are just the ones that I transposed from here. So in past years, I completed 8 project skill activities. I was really active this year and did 10. So altogether I have 18, which I put into line 2. And you can see that 18 fulfills the bronze, silver, and gold level. So I'm pretty well on my way to my gold rank, as you can see. So we'll keep working our way through these categories. I do want to just point out real quick that this box right here is where you would actually apply for your star rank. So you would mark down whatever star rank you currently have. So if you don't have any rank at all, you would check none. But in my example, I already have my silver star. So you can kind of see that's why all of these silver star requirements are already done. I've already received my silver star in past years. And then you can see I've fulfilled 7 of the 8 gold requirements, which is the minimum that I need to fulfill for my gold star, and that I've fulfilled all the ones that have an asterisk next to them. So I'm going to go ahead and apply for my gold star. So I put a check there. And then your community club leader approves or doesn't approve it. They basically look at your PDR and confirm that, yes, this looks correct. This looks like what they achieved during the year. And then they would sign it and date it. And assuming that they approved it, you would receive your star rank that year. All right. So this page, even though it looks really intimidating, it's basically a summary of everything that you do later. So that's why I skipped it at first, so that you could get some context. So you can see we're just going to keep going through the other 6 categories for the rest of the video. And those will be quicker. We're actually on the downhill for this video. Okay, so the next category is events attended. So basically anything that you attend that's 4-H related that is not a scheduled project meeting or club meeting, you always include here. So I have a lot of examples here. There are even more in the record book manual. So for example, in my project skills, you can see that there are a lot of events involved. So like the Lodi Grape Festival. I exhibited there, so I counted as an event attended. My club had a holiday party, so that wasn't a regularly scheduled meeting. That wasn't a business meeting, so it counts as a event attended. Food fiesta, livestock clinics, fashion review, club fundraisers, other county events like Ag Field Day, State Field Day, Ag Fest or county fairs, summer camp. All of these count as events attended. So anytime you go to anything that is 4-H related, that is not a club or project meeting, you always, always, always record it in category 3 as an event attended. Now that brings me into the topic of double dipping. People will often warn you against not double dipping in your personal development record. And what they mean is you shouldn't be recording the same activity in 2 different categories. If it qualifies for more than one category, pardon me, then you need to choose between the categories and just record it in one. However, section 3 is the exception. You always record all of your events attended. And then if you do something at that event that qualifies as, for example, a project skill activity, then you would record it there as well. So I have a very good example here of I attended Ag Field Day, so I recorded it as an event attended. But then I also recorded 2 project skill activities there, so vegetable judging and livestock knowledge bowl. So people get a little confused by that. I just tell them, don't worry about double dipping in regards to Section 3. Section 3 is kind of operating by its own rules. You can never double dip in Section 3. Always include stuff in Section 3. And the rest of the columns are very similar to the previous ones that we looked at in the project skill activities. You have your dates, you have your hours, you have your level, and the location. So you can see that the hours can get pretty long in this one, as opposed to project skill activities where it was usually minutes. Some events are really long, like AgFest or camp would be a lot of hours. And also please note that multi-day events would count as just one entry. So you wouldn't say AgFest Day 1, AgFest Day 2, AgFest Day 3. You wouldn't divide it like that. You would count one event, even if it's multi-day, as a single entry. Also, you can't divide AgFest into like swine show and sheep show and poultry show. You can't divide it up that way. It's considered a single event. Okay, so you can see it has the summary line up here, and so I would just transfer that up to this third line up here, and I've have 39 events attended total, which fulfills the bronze and the silver. Not the gold, though. That's the one category that I did not fulfill the gold star requirement. So that is my 7 out of 8. I missed that one. Okay, so we will move on to the next category. And I will talk a little bit more about double dipping real quick because this has the easiest example of what is actual double dipping. So section 4 is leadership development, and section 6 or 5, I can count. Section 5 is citizenship and community service. So you can see in my first entry in category 4 is chairman of the club's park cleanup committee. So I'm a chairman. That's definitely a leadership role. So it can definitely go in section 4. However, you're also doing a park cleanup. So that could count as community service. If I recorded that chairmanship in both section 4 and section 5, that's what we mean by double dipping. It's the same activity counted in multiple categories. So what you need to do in those cases is what I've done here. I chose one category over the other. I just put it in leadership development, and I did not put it in citizenship and community service. So when you're deciding where to put it, we actually encourage you to be a little strategic. So when you're looking ahead at your star ranks, you can look at your summary here and be like, okay, eventually I'm going to be going for my platinum star. So you can see that I'm getting pretty close to the platinum requirement in leadership development, but in community service, I'm not quite as close. So in that case, I might consider changing this entry from section 4 to section 5. That might be a little more strategic. And that's totally fine. That's actually encouraged. So hopefully that clears up what we mean by double dipping and how it does and doesn't apply to 4-H events attended. All right, so some other examples of leadership development would be being a member of a committee. You don't necessarily have to be the chairman of a committee to include it as a leadership entry. You are taking a leadership role, though not the highest leadership role, by being on the committee, so you can count it. Being any kind of teen or junior leader, being a camp counselor, leading activities. So this is one that people often forget to include in their record book. Maybe you led icebreakers at a club meeting. You were taking a leadership role, even if it was relatively small and fairly spontaneous. That would still go in your record book. You stepped up as a leader and therefore can record it. Being a club officer would definitely count. Leadership roles can be big or small, and you can kind of see that reflected in the hours column. Once again, we have the dates, hours, level, and location. So you can see 0.25 of an hour would be 15 minutes. So for 15 minutes, I led icebreakers. That is a leadership development activity, but it's not quite on the same scale as being, say, a camp counselor where you spent 80 hours doing that. So that brings us to how in section 4, and in another section we'll get to in a bit, we actually have a subdivision. And this is a little easier to see on the star rank summary. So if you look at category 4, we have leadership development. So these are all of those leadership activities ranging from that 15-minute icebreaker activity all the way up to being a camp junior counselor. All of those would count in these numbers. But then we break out significant leadership roles. So the rule of thumb for that is it's a role that requires 20 hours of work or more. So overall, I did 7 leadership activities this year, and 3 of those were significant leadership roles. So you can kind of see here in the star rank requirements, it has the total number of leadership development, and then in parentheses underneath, the number of significant leadership roles that need to be done for that rank. So for your bronze and silver, any kind of leadership will do. You don't have to do those larger leadership roles. But by the time you get up to your gold and your platinum star, there are asterisks, so you have to be doing some significant leadership in order to get those higher ranks. Which makes sense, right? Okay, so scrolling back down to the entry section, oh, a little too far, you can see that you record this here as well. So here's your total past year, total this year, total all years. We've seen this in the other sections, but then it has the little breakout of how many of these were significant, which one means that you spent at least 20 hours doing them, and you have a leadership development report for it. So the leadership development report is another form in the record book that can be completed by intermediate and senior members who are doing these higher level leadership activities. And there will be a separate video about that. But basically, if you count something as being a significant leadership activity, you have to have a leadership development report to correspond with it. So for this year, I completed 3 of them. I had my teen leader role, I had my junior camp counselor role, and my club officer role. So it'll have you total that up. And since I'm going for my gold star, it will ask me, did I meet the requirement? And I would check yes. Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense for the leadership development. We are going to move right along to category 5, which, as mentioned before, is citizenship and community service. So it's community service is pretty intuitive. Most people know what at a community service is. So that would be helping out at a food bank, doing that park cleanup. Which I forgot to put in this fake, or no, up here. I put it in my leadership, but I could have put it down here. Helping, donating blood at the school blood drive, that kind of thing. Anything that feels like you're giving back to the community, doing community service would go in section 5. So we actually let you count each time that you do a community service activity, even if it's the same activity, but on different dates. So you can see in this example, I helped out at a food bank. I did it once in November and again in December. I could count both of those instances as separate entries in community service. In 4-H, we encourage people to do something called service learning projects. I always say these are kind of like community service on steroids. So not only do you do a service project, so you provide a service to the community, in this case, building a demonstration garden at the fairgrounds. But before that, you have a learning component. So in this case, we learned about drought-resistant plants from the master gardeners. So we learned about something which then made our service much more relevant and much larger of an impact. So since it's a larger activity than, say, just donating food in a can food drive or something like that, we want to give you a little more bang for your buck in the record book. So you can count that as 2 entries, 1 entry for the learning component and 1 entry for the service component. So hopefully that makes sense. People sometimes get confused by service learning. Feel free to ask your County 4-H office for more info on that kind of thing. We love to support those kind of activities. Then citizenship will be anything regarding civic engagement or learning how the government works, that kind of thing. Attending California Focus, which is a citizenship conference in Sacramento every year, is a great example. helping out with a voter registration drive would count, as long as it wasn't partisan, so it wasn't supporting one political party over another, that kind of thing. All of that would count as citizenship, which could go under Section 5. Okay, so moving on to Section 6. Communication skills. So once again, I tried to give a variety of examples, but this can be a lot of different things. So I encourage you to take a look at the record book manual about the communication skills. They give a lot of great examples. Take a quick look at that as well. But a really common type of communication skill is giving a prepared talk. So in my example, I gave a prepared talk about what 4-H was at my first club meeting of the year. So another common example of a prepared talk would be a project report. However, the emphasis is on prepared. So standing up and just saying, yeah, we had our club meet or our project meeting last week. We had a good time. It was really fun. I learned a lot. And then sitting down, that's not a communication skill. However, if you prepared what you were going to say in advance and really thought it through and it communicated important information to people, then that could count as a communication skill. So yeah, just emphasis on prepared. Appearances on radio or on TV definitely count. We have a lot of 4-Hers who try to go on Cat Country or K-Hop to talk about 4-H Week or about AgFest. Writing articles for newspapers. So in this case, I had it published in the Bear Creek High newspaper, the Stockton Record. We have a blog on our 4-H website. If you wrote an article that was published on the blog, that would count. So any kind of article that you wrote. This can't be an article written about you. It might be a lovely long profile about you, but you need to be the one who wrote it, not someone writing about you. And then social media can be another form of communication skill if you're doing something like being the moderator or an admin, or you created something. That would count. Just being active on a Facebook page would not count. So just liking and commenting and occasionally posting on your club's Facebook page would not count. But if you were the admin, then that could count as a communication skill. Representing 4-H is another really common communication skill. So like in this example, there was a holiday festival and we represented 4-H. So maybe I was wearing my 4-H uniform and we had an outreach booth with information about our 4-H club. That would count as a communication skill. So anything where you're visibly identifiable as a 4-H member at a non-4-H activity or event would count as a communication skill. And then finally, gave an illustrated talk at presentation day. An illustrated talk is a type of what we call 4-H presentation. So I'm going to pull something up real quick. So if you go back to our website, events and calendar, I'm going to take us to our presentation day site real quick. So these are the different types of 4-H presentations. So demonstrations, illustrated talks, all the way through to impromptu speeches, interpretive readings, skits, cultural arts. And there are very specific requirements and characteristics of each of these types of presentations, which are listed in detail in the California 4-H presentation manual. So these are called 4-H presentations. In the record book, we actually ask you about whether any of these communication skills were specifically 4-H presentations. And once again, this has to do with your star rank. So I gave a 4-H presentation about robotics at my school science fair, which is something outside of 4-H, but it's still the presentation I gave fulfilled the requirements to be a 4-H presentation. So, of these 7 communication activities, 2 of them were, or wait, yes, 2 of them, I'm sorry, were 4-H presentations specifically. So once again, if we go up to the star rank chart, just like leadership development, it's split into 2. So these are all of your communication skills that you've done on the top, with 4-H presentations broken out on the bottom. So of the 37 communication skills I've done over the years, 12 of them have been 4-H presentations. And communication skills are super important in 4-H, so they're required for any kind of star rank, and a certain number of them need to be those formal, very high quality 4-H presentations. So that's why they're in parentheses below. Okay, so hopefully that'll make sense for communication skills. All right. Moving on to section 7, we have honors and recognition. So these are all of your significant awards, prizes, that kind of thing. So receiving a star rank would definitely count. So maybe my 2018 record book, I got fulfilled my star rank requirements. So now in my 2018-2019 book, I can count that star rank as a credit. Being a county winner, a gold medal winner, first or second place in a competition, reserve grand champion, anything like that where you're in the highest tier of achievement at that competition. So being 10th place in showmanship or receiving a red ribbon for a display normally would not go in Section 7 of the PDR. We do have a little bit of flexibility though. So the example I usually use is maybe you got 3rd place in showmanship, which normally wouldn't go in here. Usually it's just 1st or 2nd. But maybe the previous year you got 20th place in showmanship. So that is a huge improvement and might be really significant to you as an individual. So you can make that judgment call to put it in. So it's supposed to be significant honors and recognition. So if it's significant to you, it can go in here. You just might have your community club leader asking you why it's included in there if you're going for a star rank and it matters. Just be prepared to tell people the reasoning behind it. And then, like many other sections of the PDR, you can include some things outside of 4-H, so like honor roll, being a swim team champion, all of that could be counted in here. So this part is pretty straightforward. Just include all of your major achievements in that section. All right, and that brings us to the final section. Category 8, healthy lifestyle activities. So all the other parts of the record book, we focus on your 4-H activities and then give you a little bit of room for outside of 4-H. Section 8 is actually only things outside of 4-H. So we want to encourage you and recognize the great things that you're doing outside of our program. So this can be anything that is an organized activity that you do for at least 20 hours. So some examples on here, being part of a church youth group would definitely fulfill that. I play the clarinet with a jazz band and then with a totally different group. So it's the same instrument, but 2 different organizations. I can count it twice. For activities that you do for a really long period or even year round, and you do a lot, so like a sports team is often this kind of activity. You can actually divide the year into quarters, so 3-month periods, and as long as you do at least 25 hours of that activity per quarter, you can count it multiple times. So in this fall quarter, I did basketball for 40 hours, so I can count that as one entry. But then I also played 40 hours of basketball in the winter, so I can count it again. Just once again, remember that these need to be organized teams or activities, so it can't just be that you play a lot of pickup basketball on the playground. It needs to be an organized activity. And then even things like a part-time job can count in healthy lifestyle activities. You just can't count things that would be normally expected of you. So, like, you can't include homework, feeding your pets, doing chores around the house. Um, and it has to be an organized activity. So, like a family vacation couldn't count. So maybe you took a week-long hiking trip in Colorado with your family and it was an amazing vacation. It's not part of an organized group, so it would not go in Section 8. And once again, the record book manual has a lot of really helpful examples that go beyond what I have here. So if you're curious if something can be included in here, that is a great place to look. And that's it. So I would just make sure that for all the sections, I've taken this kind of summary line up here for the category and transferred it to the star rank summary. And so you just take it one line at a time. You transfer your projects completed, you transfer your project skill activities, and so on and so on. So it's just lots of little bite-sized chunks that when it's all put together on one page, it does look kind of intimidating. But as you can see, you just take it bit by bit. And then, as I said, I like to highlight the requirements that I fulfilled so that I can get an idea at a glance whether I've made enough progress to get my next star rank. So I have my silver already, and based on my totals here, I have 7 of the 8 requirements for gold and all of the asterisk ones, so I can go ahead and apply for my gold star. But you can see I've got a ways to go for my platinum. um, just so you know, we tried to design the star rank program so that the average participant would be able to get a star rank every 2 years of participation. So if you're reasonably involved and you record everything in your record book thoroughly, then you should be able to move through the star ranks every 2 years. And I just want to reiterate one more time that people get scared of double dipping. I explained what that was, but make sure that you're not overly cautious. Make sure that you're counting everything you're supposed to. So an excellent example of that would be here. I attended county fashion review. So I count that as an event attended. And I make sure that I also record that I exhibited a dress at County Fashion Review under project skill activities. And then I have yet a third entry about that. Whoops, too far. Under honors and recognition, I was a county winner at that competition. So none of that is considered double dipping. That's properly recording everything that I did at that event. I recorded the event, I recorded the skill I demonstrated, and I recorded the award that I got. So that is not double dipping. That is exactly how we want you to do it and how we want you to maximize your entries and proceed through your star ranks. So we know that can be a little confusing. If you ever have a question and want to double check if something is appropriate to do in your personal development record, as I said, this is my email and this is my phone number. Feel free to contact me. Hopefully I'll be around. I don't know how long people will be looking at this video. If it's 20 years in the future, I can't guarantee I'll still be here. But if you call this number, hopefully our office will still be open. All right, so that wraps up the personal development report. As I said, it is the largest chunk of the record book. It's kind of the most intricate, so this was definitely going to be the longest video of this series. Thank you for sticking it out. I hope you learned something and it's demystified this form a little bit and that you feel encouraged. All right, we'll catch you in the next video, which should be about the annual project report. See you then.